Medieval or Middle Ages. We think of knights in shining armour, lavish banquets, wandering minstrels, kings, queens, bishops, monks, pilgrims, and glorious pageantry. In film and in literature, medieval life seems heroic, entertaining, and romantic. In reality, life in the Middle Ages, a period that extended from approximately the 5th century to the 15th century in Western Europe, was sometimes all these things, as well as harsh, uncertain, and often dangerous. Feudalism was a system of loyalties and protections during the Middle Ages. As the Roman Empire crumbled, emperors granted land to nobles in exchange for their loyalty. These lands eventually developed into manors, a manor being a land owned by a noble and everything on it. A typical manor consisted of a castle, small village, and a farmland. During the Middle Ages, peasants could no longer count on the Roman army to protect them. Germans and Vikings overran homes and farms throughout Europe. The peasants turned to the landowners, often called lords, to protect them. Many peasants remained free, but most became serfs. A serf was bound to the land. He could no longer leave without buying his freedom, an unlikely occurrence in the Middle Ages. Life for a serf was not much better than the life of a slave. The only difference is the serf could not be sold to another property. Serfs would often work for 3 to 4 days a week for the lord's rent. They would spend the rest of their week growing crops to feed their families. Other serfs worked as sharecroppers. A sharecropper would be required to turn over most of what he grew to be able to live on the land. In this feudal system, the king awarded land grants or fiefs to his most important nobles, his barons, and his bishops in return for their contribution of soldiers for the king's armies. The Catholic Church was the only church in Europe during the Middle Ages, and had its own laws and large coffers. Church leaders such as bishops and archbishops sat on the king's council and played leading roles in government. Bishops, who were often wealthy and came from noble families, ruled over groups of parishes called dioceses. Parish priests, on the other hand, came from humbler backgrounds and often had little education. The village priest tended to the sick, and if he was able, taught Latin and Bible to the youth of the village. As the population of Europe expanded in the 12th century, the churches that had been built in the Roman style with round arched roofs became too small. Some of the grand cathedrals, strained to their structural limits by the creators' drive to build higher and larger, collapsed within a century or less of their construction. The Black Death, a medieval nightmare, a time of horror. Imagine walking down the street, and every 4th person you saw would die within 3 years. The Black Death, ravaging medieval Europe from late 1347 through early 1351, wiped out nearly 1/4 of the continent's inhabitants. Medieval cities fared much worse. With their narrow streets making transmission of the disease much easier, nearly half of the population of some larger cities perished with this epidemic. The Black Death's origins were from Asia, where it decimated the population there as well, and it was brought to Western Europe along the trading routes, first arriving in Sicily in 1347. This disease was spread primarily through rats and fleas. The Black Death had a steamroller effect throughout all society. Multitudes of houses and barns infested with rats were left vacant, making it impossible to collect rents. Unused mills fell into disrepair, making it impossible to grind wheat for flour in some areas. There was a resurgence of the disease later in the century, but not as many people were infected.